Okay, so let's unpack this. Whenever the topic of artificial intelligence comes up, I mean, almost instantly, the conversation defaults to this really immediate, almost uh, visceral anxiety. Job loss, economic displacement, and this general feeling that the very core of human contribution is somehow being mechanized out of
Oh,
existence.
right.
But what if that fear, and it's a completely understandable fear, what if it's looking at the wrong part of the equation entirely?
I think it is. I think
What?
if we connect this to the bigger picture, that sort of microeconomic fear of obsolescence, it fundamentally misidentifies what AI is actually doing at a civilizational scale.
Go on.
The sources we're looking at today, they take a really radical stance. They argue that AI isn't a competitor trying to displace us. It's the next massive, and I'd say necessary step in human evolution.
So it's not about losing our jobs.
It's about finally being freed up to realize our purpose.
Exactly. It's like we need to stop focusing on the symptoms, the loss of the paycheck, and start really looking at the profound evolutionary biology and philosophy that's happening just beneath the surface. We're essentially, from what I'm gathering from these sources, viewing AI as a mechanism that automates the survival of civilization itself.
Yes, in much the same way that early biology automated the survival of the individual organism.
Mm.
That biological lens, that's really the engine of our deep dive today.
It is.
We're going to explore this concept of the cognitive autonomic system,
Yeah.
which is, I think, a really profound analogy. It suggests that modern society is right now developing an automated sort of background system for its own self-maintenance, for its
Yeah.
own life support.
And the payoff for that automation is it's staggering. It grants humanity what the sources call a cognitive dividend.
A huge one.
And that's really the mission for our deep dive today. We're going to explore this system in detail. We're going to try and separate the intrinsic drive of what the sources call work from the extrinsic requirement of the job.
A critical distinction.
And we'll unpack this idea that global conflict is maybe more of a biological pathology than a purely political one. And I think this is the most astonishing part. We'll look at how money itself is evolving from a defense mechanism against scarcity into a tool for steering our collective human intent.
It's a huge shift. But before we can even get to the analogy itself, we absolutely have to establish the vocabulary. We have to.
Correct.
Because our whole societal discussion about AI's impact is just so muddied. We use words like work and job completely interchangeably. But the philosophical distinction between them, well, it's the key to understanding this entire shift we're going through.
All right, let's start there then. Let's get these counterintuitive definitions straight. We need to separate what humans are intrinsically driven to do from what the economy, currently forces them to do. Let's start with work. How do the sources define that intrinsic effort?
So, work, in this context, is the intrinsic psychological drive. It's the application of effort toward a result. But, and this is the critical part, that effort is self-directed and it's self-rewarding.
So it's not about the paycheck.
Not at all. Humans are naturally wired for this kind of endeavor. It's the engine that drives us to master a skill, to express our own agency. It's what leads to that deep, satisfying feeling of flow or, competence. Work is, at its core, rooted in internal purpose.
I think everyone listening can recognize that feeling, the hours you spend trying to master a complex piece on the guitar, or maybe a dedicated woodworker who spends days perfecting a joint that no one else is even going to see.
That's it.
That's the expression of work. The effort itself is the reward.
Exactly. Now, contrast that with the job. The job is the extrinsic construct. It's the specific social and economic contract where you trade the application of your intrinsic work specifically for survival.
Right. It comes with schedules, with external bosses, performance metrics, compensation.
And the absolute requirement that you show up, whether you're feeling a sense of flow or purpose or not, it doesn't matter.
And this distinction, it just immediately clarifies that deep anxiety people are facing. When they say they're afraid of AI, what they're really mourning is the potential loss of the job.
Their survival mechanism.
Yes, the survival mechanism. And maybe the status that comes with being a utility in the economic machine.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that is what the sources call the trap of utility. Historically, and especially since the Industrial Revolution, a person's worth has been just inextricably linked to their mechanical usefulness to the market.
You were valuable socially and economically because you could perform some necessary repetitive task, whether it was manual or cognitive.
And you could do it more efficiently, or at least more cheaply, than a technological replacement.
Yeah.
Your value was your function.
And this linkage, this idea that your worth is your function, the sources are arguing that's what AI is about to completely shatter.
It is.
But I have to push back a little on that. For a lot of people, the job, even if it's tedious, it provides structure, right? It provides identity, social cohesion. If AI just removes that whole extrinsic framework, aren't we risking a kind of, I don't know, a collapse into widespread nihilism? Where does the structure come from if our utility is gone?
That's a crucial question, and it's probably the biggest challenge of this transition. The sources absolutely acknowledge that it's going to be turbulent precisely because we have baked utility so deeply into our sense of self.
Right. What do you do is the first question people ask each other.
It is, but the sources argue that the structure we need is actually an internal one. That intrinsic drive to work we were just talking about, the job was just, it was a crude external regulator, a babysitter in a way.
So you're saying we've outsourced our sense of purpose to our employer?
For centuries. Look at the historical context. Before the industrial age, most people were utilities on a farm. Their worth was tied to their physical output. Then we transitioned that same concept of utility to the factory and then to the office cubicle. AI is simply completing that arc by automating cognitive utility.
It feels like we're addicted to the validation that comes from being useful on someone else's terms. The question, what do you do, is, like you said, it's a status marker. It's not a genuine inquiry into your inner life or passions.
And that ties directly back to the trap of utility. The anxiety isn't really about losing the intrinsic act of creating something. It's about losing the extrinsic validation and, more importantly, losing the financial safety net that's attached to that validation.
So the AI revolution is forcing a necessary but probably very painful societal maturation.
It is a decoupling of worth from mechanical productivity. We have to learn as a society how to derive our self-worth from our intent, from our passion, from our unique contribution, rather than just from a paycheck.
Okay, that sets the stage perfectly. We need to keep these definitions absolutely distinct, work as our intrinsic purpose, the job as an extrinsic survival contract, as we jump into the biological analogy that, well, that justifies this massive social upheaval.
Let's do it.
So let's move to the core metaphor that really ties this whole evolutionary process together. The biological parallel of the autonomic nervous system, the ANS. I mean, it provides a phenomenal framework for understanding what it means to automate survival.
It really does. The human ANS is, well, it's the most ancient and essential automation system that complex life ever developed.
Oh.
It manages all of our life-sustaining processes without requiring any conscious input from us.
Right. We don't consciously regulate our heart rate or manage the insane chemical complexity of digestion
Or coordinate temperature regulation or consciously prompt every single breath we take. These functions just run. They run automatically, forming the biological background of our entire existence.
And the evolutionary benefit of that automation isn't just about saving energy. It's a massive developmental leap. The physical body essentially became a self-sustaining base layer.
Exactly. By stabilizing and automating basic survival, by moving the mechanics of life into the background evolution, granted humanity this phenomenal developmental advantage. The sources call it the cognitive dividend.
Okay, explain that. The cognitive dividend.
The lower brain structures, the ones concerned with immediate survival, they were freed from moment-to-moment crisis management. This allowed resources, both energetic and structural, to be reallocated toward developing the higher brain.
The cerebral cortex.
The cerebral cortex, the seat of abstract thought, of philosophy, of art, of complex community building. It could only truly develop because the heart kept beating without us having to constantly think about it.
So automation of the biological foundation led directly to higher consciousness.
That is the precise parallel the sources are drawing. So now let's translate this to the civilizational scale. AI and our modern logistical systems, they are forming the collective autonomic system. They are beginning to perform the foundational, life-sustaining functions of society.
Things like optimizing global logistics, synthesizing these overwhelming streams of data for decision-making, running basic production lines, maintaining complex infrastructure.
All of it.
We are, in effect, automating the heartbeat of society. Before AI, civilization's collective human energy, its conscious, directed intelligence, was overwhelmingly focused on what the sources call systemic maintenance. I mean, just think of the staggering complexity of managing global shipping lanes or optimizing electricity distribution grids, handling complex corporate accounting, or coordinating governmental bureaucracy.
That systemic maintenance was, for all intents and purposes, the job of civilization. It consumed the vast majority of conscious human effort. But now, As AI takes over these foundational, predictive, and, repetitive cognitive tasks, those resources, the collective human attention, can finally be freed up.
We get a societal scale cognitive dividend.
A massive one.
But let's try to ground this in reality for a second. Can you give us a really concrete example of this automation in, say, the logistical space? What is AI doing that's analogous to the human body regulating its own temperature?
Oh, that's a perfect example. Let's look at dynamic supply chain optimization. The human body uses homeostasis, a self-regulating process, to maintain its internal stability. A global supply chain, which is kind of like the fragile gut of our civilization.
I like that analogy.
It used to require millions of human analysts constantly predicting demand, scheduling shipments, mitigating delays, all based on static old data. Now, deep learning models can dynamically adjust shipping routes in real time. They can predict maintenance failures in cargo ships before they happen. They can reallocate resources based on live weather and geopolitical data, ensuring the flow of materials.
All autonomously.
All autonomously. The system is regulating itself. And this shifts the conscious human role from management to design. We're no longer in the weeds. Our job becomes designing the initial ethical constraints of that self-regulation.
So if the plumbing and the nervous system of society are moved into the automatic background, the collective human mind is fundamentally promoted.
It is.
We get to shift our focus from managing the how of survival to defining the why of our existence.
That is the critical implication. The human species, collectively, is granted the luxury of allocating its highest order processing power. Our conscious, directed intent to matters of ethics, philosophy, aesthetics, social design. The societal organism is, in a way, moving up Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and it's all enabled by this stable, automated foundation.
Okay, this sets us up perfectly for the big philosophical challenge that always comes up with this idea. If AI removes the struggle that's necessary for survival, doesn't it also remove the value, the drive, the opportunity for mastery? We have to address this idea that struggle is inherently good for us.
Right, and that is the most prevalent and, I think, the most deeply held critique. It comes from this belief, probably derived from Enlightenment and Victorian-era ethics, that extrinsic difficulty is what confers inherent value and builds character.
What doesn't kill you makes you stronger argument.
Basically, yes. And critics fear that if AI minimizes that kind of challenge, we just become passive. Our skills atrophy.
That's
we
fair.
become soft.
But the sources offer such an elegant reframing of struggle. They use this analogy of the tractor and the gardener.
It's a powerful one.
The existence of a highly efficient automated tractor that can plow 100 acres in an hour doesn't in any way prevent a person from choosing to cultivate a small, personal garden plot entirely by hand.
And why would they choose the harder way? Not because they must. The tractor guarantees the caloric intake for their survival, but for the joy of the work.
They value the sensory experience, the intimacy with the process, the small victory of mastery, the taste of a tomato they grew with their own hands.
Exactly. The value shifts entirely from utility, which is feeding the family, to intent, which is the expression of self through cultivation.
This distinction is so powerful. Past struggle was mandatory. You worked the field because you had to eat. The struggle was a condition of your existence.
And future struggle becomes choice. With automated survival guaranteed, the struggle inherent in, say, painting a difficult mural, or mastering a piece of complex astrophysics, or coding a unique algorithm just for intellectual curiosity, it becomes intentional.
The value of that effort is found entirely within the experience of the intent and the quality of the mastery. It's completely separate from its mechanical utility in securing your basic life resources.
The goal of the struggle changes. It moves from making the output functional to making the experience exceptional and meaningful.
And this implies a really profound societal evolution, which the source material breaks down into 3 distinct stages of human focus.
It does, and this progression really highlights where human value and effort have historically been allocated. Stage 1 was manual labor. This dominated all of human history until the 20th century. The focus was on overwhelming physical survival, and value is derived from physical endurance, from strength, from the efficiency of moving matter.
If you could lift more, you were more valuable. Simple as that.
Then we entered stage 2, information processing, which is the stage we're currently exiting. This was the age of cognitive survival, where technology helped us move information around. Value shifted to technical proficiency, accuracy, and the speed of processing data.
This is the era of the middle manager, the financial analyst, the data entry clerk. Their value was tied to being fast, accurate cognitive utilities.
And now, We are rapidly transitioning into stage 3, AI integration, which focuses entirely on existential design. This is the societal promotion we've been talking about. Value is no longer in the execution because AI handles execution brilliantly. Value is now found in philosophy, ethics, aesthetics, or taste, and the rigorous direction of intent.
Let's elaborate on stage 3 because it can sound incredibly abstract. How does taste become an economically valuable input? What does an ethical or a philosophical worker actually do in this new system?
They provide the essential, non-automatable directional data. Think of it this way. AI can efficiently produce 1 billion identical functional chairs. That's pure utility. But a human with taste provides the intentional input that says, wait, we should only produce 10,000 chairs designed with specific aesthetic principles that evoke a sense of heritage and beauty. That direction, that choice for beauty over maximal efficiency, that is the input of taste. It guides the system's output toward meaning, not just optimization.
So the human input shifts from how do we make these chairs efficiently to which chair should be made and why does its existence even matter?
Precisely.
The philosopher's role is to define the moral parameters of the AI's actions. The ethicist's role is to ensure the system's optimization functions align with human flourishing, not just profit or output maximization.
Correct. The ultimate struggle remains, but it is moved entirely from the physical plane and the technical plane to the existential plane. The hardest work in the future isn't coding or lifting. It's defining what it means to be human, what we stand for, and what kind of future we intend to architect with these incredible tools.
The shift from mandatory struggle to chosen struggle, driven by this cognitive autonomic system, it seems to have its most dramatic implications when we start looking at global conflict. The sources suggest that war isn't just a political problem, it's a symptom of a deeply locked biological pathology in the collective human organism.
That is, for me, the most profound takeaway from all of this. For centuries, because our societal life support system, that collective autonomic system, was so inefficient, so prone to scarcity, so highly fragile, humanity as a whole has been locked into a state of hyperactive autonomic response.
Which is chronic threat detection,
Yeah.
but at a group level.
Yes. And what happens when a collective organism is constantly, day in and day out, uncertain of its own survival?
It panics, it gets defensive, everything looks like a threat.
Exactly. If the survival foundation is unstable, every difference, every fluctuation in resource availability is automatically escalated to an existential threat. This locked, survival-driven state translates directly into social pathologies. Collective hypervigilance means that minor variations, whether they manifest as differences in race, nationality, religion, or access to water, are instantly perceived as justifying preemptive aggression or extreme isolationism.
So things like nationalism, racism, resource wars, the sources are viewing them not as purely moral failures, but as the inevitable consequence of a system running in a chronic, unrefined fight-or-flight mode.
Precisely. And the sources zero in on a physical expression of this fear. They talk about the concept of the national amygdala.
Okay, so biologically, the amygdala is the threat response center in the brain that triggers fight or flight.
Right. So what is the manifestation of the national amygdala in a modern state?
It has to be the massive military-industrial complexes, the vast defense budgets, the obsession with competitive resource acquisition. All of these are resources being diverted away from things like social reasoning, long-term environmental planning, cooperative global infrastructure.
They are resources being poured directly into the collective threat response center. And this chronic autonomic arousal at the state level, it creates a physical impairment. Think about what happens to an individual human brain when it's under chronic stress.
The prefrontal cortex, the seat of complex reasoning and empathy and long-term planning, it's literally starved of resources. They all go to the immediate threat response.
Yes. So when we see nations struggling to cooperate on massive global issues like climate change or pandemics, even when the long-term threat is clearly existential, it's because they're biologically locked into prioritizing immediate self-interested survivalist thinking.
Their collective prefrontal cortex is offline because the national amygdala is just screaming.
It's screaming. That is the critical mechanism. The scarcity pathology compels nations to view every foreign relationship through a zero-sum lens. If my survival is not guaranteed, I simply cannot afford the luxury of empathy or altruism toward another nation. It's a biological impossibility.
This makes the need for the AI system, what the sources call the global stabilizer, profoundly urgent. The only way to unlock humanity from this self-destructive cycle is to move to what they call the somatic state.
The somatic state, applied geopolitically, means moving toward a state of conscious, embodied security. It's a civilization that is stable, self-aware, and making its decisions from a place of choice and established safety rather than from reactive instinct.
So if the foundational survival elements are guaranteed, if the supply chain flows reliably, if energy is secure, if food production is optimized globally, the national organism can finally relax.
It can relax, and that is AI's primary function as the global stabilizer. By automating civilization's fundamental survival mechanisms and making them transparent, predictable, and resilient, AI lowers the collective threat threshold.
And the lowering of this threshold, it allows for a massive reallocation of energy.
A huge one. That vast budget currently being consumed by the national amygdala, the hyper-competitive resource races, the redundant military expenditures, it can begin to flow toward the collective cerebral cortex.
Toward diplomacy, shared scientific exploration, ethical development.
This automation of peace, through the guarantee of survival, is presented as the absolute prerequisite for any kind of true collective maturity. The sources are clear. Until survival is stable, conflict is inevitable. It's not a choice, it's a symptom.
Wow, it completely reframes our entire history. We haven't just been fighting over ideology or who owns what resources, so much as we've been fighting over the structural instability of our primitive, non-automated collective nervous system.
That's the argument.
This intense biological argument seems to lead us to a very bold conclusion, that the automation of all jobs, all the cognitive and manual tasks tied to survival utility, isn't just an economic possibility, but it's a necessary civilizational catalyst.
It's framed as completely non-negotiable for progress. As long as a human being is required to trade their finite time and their unique cognitive capacity for the mere goal of securing survival, for the paycheck, their capacity for higher-order thought and for pursuing purpose for its own sake is tethered to the autonomic layer of civilization.
So the job acts as a powerful gravitational field.
A huge one. That gravity will constantly pulls our conscious human intent down to the level of basic systemic maintenance. We remain too busy ensuring the gears of survival turn to ask the profound questions about why we're turning them in the first place, or where we should be going. The job is an ethical and philosophical inhibitor.
It forces us to focus on scarcity, on competition, on efficiency, and often at the expense of things like ethics or beauty.
Exactly. So the forced removal of that survival work, the complete automation of utility, creates what the sources call a renaissance of intent. This is the moment where extrinsic motivation, the necessity of the clock, the financial incentive, it must be systematically replaced by intrinsic motivation.
The desire to master, to express, to connect.
The things that make us human.
But this transition, it's going to be traumatic because it forces the collective to finally confront the difference between being busy and being meaningful.
Precisely. If AI can file the paperwork faster or predict the market better or manage the supply chain flawlessly, the only remaining questions for human input are subjective. They're philosophical. They're ethical.
The mechanical requirements of existence are satisfied. Now we have to focus on the moral requirements.
Which brings us to this definition of collective maturity. A civilization that no longer has to focus on the how of its survival has no choice but to master the why of its existence. It's a forced maturation.
We have to become better architects of meaning, better philosophers, better moral leaders, because the system we created, the AI, is just sitting there waiting for its marching orders. And those orders have to come from human intent.
And this means the nature of skill changes again completely. The most valuable skills become those that are irreducibly human. Empathy, critical ethical judgment, aesthetic discernment, the capacity for moral responsibility. The time freed up by automation must be converted into these new forms of work, the pursuit of truth and beauty for their own sake.
So if the underlying economic reality shifts this dramatically, if survival is automated and guaranteed, then the tools we use to manage that reality must also undergo a transformation. And this brings us to the fascinating evolution of money itself.
Right. Money, for all of human history, has been the ultimate defensive asset. It was a tangible shield against death, against starvation, against insecurity. It granted you access to resources and protection from scarcity.
But once the cognitive autonomic system stabilizes and guarantees survival for everyone, money loses its primary function as a defensive mechanism.
It has to. It transforms, according to the sources, into a crucial dynamic tool for steering our collective focus. It becomes money as programmable intent.
Okay, unpack that. Programmable intent.
In an automated world, physical production is cheap and abundant. What becomes scarce is attention, meaning, and intentional direction. So money transforms into a transparent signaling mechanism. It becomes the steering wheel for the global AI system. We use this new form of currency to signal not just the exchange of value, but what the collective truly values and where our resources should be directed.
And this signaling mechanism has to be coupled directly with high-fidelity information about the origin and the purpose of that value. Which brings us to the underlying infrastructure, the decentralized ledgers. The sources detail the role of blockchain technology as providing the essential nervous tissue for this new economic steering system.
The nervous tissue analogy is extremely rigorous here. It's not just a metaphor. A blockchain provides an immutable, transparent, decentralized ledger which makes value programmable. This is so critical.
Because traditional money is...
It's dumb.
Right, it only records an amount.
It's dumb.
Yeah.
New money, using smart contracts and tokenomics, can carry essential metadata about its ethics, its provenance, and its intended purpose.
Okay, let's walk through a concrete scenario. If money is programmable intent, how does that translate into a real economic action?
Okay, imagine a unit of currency, a token, is created specifically to reward the work of existential design, let's say funding philosophical research. That token, through a smart contract, could be programmed with specific rules.
Like what?
Like, it can only be redeemed for resources that advance non-utility goals. It could be used to commission public art or to sponsor a school focused on ethics, but the smart contract would prevent it from being used to fund, say, increased mechanical efficiency in a factory or for resource extraction. It enforces the intent of the collective that created the value in the first place.
That's a profound leap. It means the economic system shifts from rewarding the fastest outcome to rewarding the most meaningful outcome, and it's dictated by transparent human intent. And this verifiability is essential for ensuring what the sources are calling the human premium.
The human premium is the mechanism by which the unique, intentional, intrinsic work of humans is recognized and rewarded. It's how we distinguish it from automated production. For example, a chair made by an AI-managed factory might cost, say, $10. It's flawless, pure utility.
Right.
A chair made by a human artisan, an expression of work, might cost $1,000. In this new economy, the value assigned to the artisan's chair carries metadata about the intentional struggle, the unique human touch, the aesthetic intent. The economic system is specifically designed to recognize and uphold that premium, ensuring that human creativity is always incentivized and valued higher than mere mechanical output.
And ultimately, this integration ensures that the powerful AI system remains responsive to our moral direction. If the economic steering mechanism is transparent, programmable, and ethically metadata-rich, then our collective values are what dictate the path of the entire automated system.
It becomes the ultimate form of democratic, intentional control over our automated civilization.
So, where does this all leave us? We started this deep dive with that deep-seated anxiety about AI taking away jobs. But going through this idea of the cognitive autonomic system, it reveals that this fear fundamentally misinterprets the nature of what it is to be human.
I think so.
We are not being eliminated from the essential human role. We are being dramatically, fundamentally promoted.
We are graduating from the role of the systemic maintenance worker to the role of the existential architect. The struggle for physical survival, the jobs being automated precisely so we can engage fully with a struggle for meaning the work.
This is the ultimate blessing of automated survival. We're moving away from defining our intrinsic worth by what we produce, the output of our mechanical utility, and we're entering an era where we define ourselves entirely by what we mean.
By our ethics, our philosophy, our unique taste, and our intentional pursuit of beauty.
It's the same pattern again. Just as the biological automation of the body allowed for the development of human civilization.
The work of AI automates the survival of civilization to finally allow for the pursuit of purpose for its own sake. The true, essential work that remains is the work that is uniquely, unreplicably human. It's the work of empathy, the work of defining and exercising moral responsibility, and the pursuit of truth and beauty in a world that's finally free from the tyranny of scarcity.
So AI is not the end of work.
It's the end of compulsory existence.
And that leaves us with the ultimate, final, provocative question. The one we are now, for the very first time in history, fully equipped to confront as a collective. If the struggle for survival is fundamentally automated and the economy shifts entirely to steering our collective intent toward the future, will humanity choose to architect a shared purpose that is greater than its own survival? That, I think, is the ultimate test of our newfound maturity.